What's going on, everybody? I'm back. Got another bonus club and sub podcast episode talking Bellator London. Going to be a fairly quick stream here. Just going to breeze through this card, brief thoughts. I planned to do it earlier today, but I've been brutally sick for 2 days. Didn't think I was going to get it in today. My head was pounding. About 6:30 rolled around though. Kids started winding down for the night. Had a cocktail, and no, I don't feel so bad. So I figure I'll bring the heat for as long as I can here. I talk about this card real quick. So, guys, I hope you like the show. Follow, fade, whatever. But please drop a like, subscribe, whether you're following or fading. Doesn't really matter. Just help me out, man. But yeah, I'll get into it right now. So, first fight of the night. God, I was about to say Raul Rosas because I have the odds for UFC pulled up. But we have got Derek Kelly. He's taking on Dmitry Hurtsenko. Current price, Hurtsenko is minus 175. The comeback on Kelly is plus 145. I took a bit of Hurtsenko at like minus 162-ish, minus 160 earlier today. It's interesting because my initial thought when I saw the odds for this fight, I was kind of interested in Kelly because Kelly's been chalked up to like minus 800 to minus 1,000 in like every fight he's had so far. And for him to suddenly undefeated correct seemed like weird, especially against the guy with only 8 fights. And then, one of my good friends who's extremely sharp said he liked Kelly. So I went into tape thinking I'd like the Kelly side quite a bit. Came out really liking Hurtsenko. And I shouldn't say really. Like, I like Hurtsenko here, though. I think he's probably decent up to like minus 185. Hurtsenko, ATT guy, though, doesn't look like he was there this camp. He just had a baby in July, so it seems like he spent most of the camp in Europe. But I'd say he's a striker at his heart. High volume, a lot of kicks, decent counters. Someone saying looks like I'm about to go golfing with El Chapo. Maybe. I'm not Mexican, though, believe it or not. But yeah, Hurtsenko tends to play the back foot a lot, but he keeps a pretty high pace as a grappler. He's not bad. Pretty good wrestler, good defensive wrestler, decent offensive wrestler, not great. But in the aggregate, I really, really like his game. Like his cardio can be, I wouldn't say it's bad, but it can be. But he's had a couple slow round threes in the past, but never really melted down or anything like that. And yeah, I just think he's a very legit prospect. He looks like he's got all the tools. He trains with great guys. Striking looks very, very good to me, albeit against lower level competition. On the Kelly side, Kelly's an interesting cat. He does some things well. Obviously, he attempts a million takedowns, and he has very good cardio, which is obviously always bullish, something you really want to see. Decent submission grappler, pretty good at getting the back, getting the body triangle in. Yeah, I mean, he's got a decent sub game. As a striker, not really a lot there. He tends to just bomb forward, trying to swing bombs to close the gap and attempt a takedown. Problem is he's just very, very, very available to hit when he does come forward. And to me, at least, he's 6-0, so obviously he hasn't been finished yet. But he does seem like a KO that's waiting to happen. You go back, you watch his fight with Jell Zegers 2 fights ago, and he won the fight pretty solidly. He finished him in round 3, but he had some pretty sketchy moments in that fight where he got clipped hard trying to close distance, and it's happened to him in the past too. For Kelly, his kind of fights, he kind of strikes me as like a poor man's Preston Parsons, and by that I mean he's very, very available to hit. He's not the best wrestler, but he is very, very proactive about it, and if he can get his grappling going, he's pretty dangerous. Like I said, pretty good submission grappler. He's not a guy you want on top of you. So, I mean, ultimately, this fight comes down to, can Kelly get takedowns against Hurtsenko? And it's like, on the one hand, I think he can get takedowns. I'm a bit skeptical. 1, he can hold Hurtsenko down. 2, I think Hurtsenko is actually the better wrestler than Kelly is. So I don't think it'll be easy because he had trouble ripping down some guys regionally that were not good defensive wrestlers at all. So I don't think it'll necessarily even be easy for him to get takedowns here. That he's massively outgunned on the feet to an absurd degree. And so, yeah, I mean, ultimately, look, if I'm wrong about Hurtsenko's defensive wrestling and it's easy for Kelly to get him down, like, he'll probably be the side because he does have very good cardio and he can push it for 15 minutes. I don't think I will be, though. I like his pedigree a bit more. Hurtsenko's fought a little bit better competition and beaten a better slate of competition than Kelly has. He just looks to me like a much more polished fighter and a much more refined fighter. Like, I think Kelly basically needs to get 2 dominant positions, either get a sub or lock down like a body triangle here to win this fight. Whereas I think Hurtsenko could give up 2, 3, even 4 takedowns and win the fight dominantly. If they're standing, I just think Kelly is a total fish out of water. So, yeah, I like the Hurtsenko side up to like minus 185. I made him about minus 200. I think that's a reasonable price on him here. Moving on, we have got fight was canceled. Sierra and Clark, Tomas Grunwald. I have no opinion here. This just got announced today. Very weird. Clark's minus 1,500, Grunwald's plus 850. Considering it was like 10 hours notice to fill the spot, it's probably easy for Clark. But I don't really know much about Grunwald, so not really much I can say on it. Stephen Hill, Joseph Luciano. Current price, Luciano minus 220. Comeback on Hill plus 185. Another spot going into tape. I was fairly bullish on Hill because he's another guy who's been a fairly decent favorite in every fight in his career. Just lost his last fight for the first time, and now he's taking on a guy who's been fighting in kind of the shitty Anzac regional scene. And so I was like, yeah, it could be a pretty good opportunity to buy low on Hill as a dog. But man, I just do not really. I don't want to say Hill is not about that life. That's probably being too cruel for it. But I mean, watching Stephen Hill, he just seems like a guy who has to be a hammer and doesn't really know how to exist as a nail. This guy in every one of his wins, he's basically been able to easily kind of rush into the clinch, get takedowns, get to dominant positions, and finish on the mat mostly. Last fight, we saw him fight Mike Shipman. And Mike Shipman, we're going to talk about him in a second. But Mike Shipman, I don't want to say he's a good fighter. He's like an okay fighter, like veteran of many fights. I think he's got 40 fights. Guy's been around the block. But I mean, he's not dangerous with his hands. He's got a good choke game, like front choke game, but he's not a guy who's going to process grapple many guys. And like Hill came out there, couldn't really get going with his grappling at all. Shipman actually took him down once or twice. I think Hill got briefly hurt by a shot in the clinch, but like it was very, very clear, like Hill had been used to physically dominating inferior competition, and he couldn't physically dominate Shipman, who's actually fought some like pretty good comp. And, the round ended. Shipman clearly won the first round, but it wasn't like, he almost beat Hill within an inch of his life. He won the round solidly. He kind of briefly hurt him, and then Hill just quit on the stool. Didn't come back out there. So I don't really... Yeah, so like I just feel like Hill kind of showed that he's not really a guy who can face adversity. And on the other side with Luciano, like I really don't like Luciano's game technically. Like he's a proactive grappler, attempts a ton of takedowns, but I don't think he's the best wrestler. I don't think he's the best control grappler. I think he's a pretty bad striker. Like skill for skill, like Luciano is not great, but what he is an absolute hammer. Guy's not afraid of adversity. He has very good cardio. Will keep pressing forward. Will keep attempting takedowns. And so I look at this fight and like it's possible Hill is the side at dog and he's just like the better fighter in the aggregate and can kind of dictate with Shipman. Or not with Shipman, sorry, with Luciano. But I'm like pretty skeptical, to be honest, that he can do that. I think Shipman, or not just, again, I keep saying Shipman. I think if he gets takedowns against Luciano, he won't hold him down. I'm almost positive Luciano has better cardio. And I think a guy like Luciano who won't go away for 15 minutes is probably like cancer for Hill here. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not dying to play minus 220 on Luciano. No real interest in that. I do have some interest in like the over in this fight. I don't know if it's moved at all. It's up to minus 200 now. Now, fight goes the distance actually isn't bad. Like, unless you think Hill's just going to retire on the stool every time, I'd be a bit surprised if Luciano like stopped him with a sub or stopped him in round. But yeah, I like I lean the Luciano side. I don't really think there's much value on a side in this fight, though. Moving on, Mike Shipman taking on Islam Bessette. Bessette making his debut in the UFC. This is like a really funky fight because like it's another one where I like to bet guys like Shipman at dog in this spot. He's obviously fought a far higher level of competition, bit more experienced. Like those are the spots I'm looking for. Plus Shipman's a grappler and Bessette, he wasn't initially, but he kind of is as well. And I think Bessette could provide some decent opportunities here for Shipman to kind of capitalize on his front choke game. But man, like when taping Shipman, like I know he's fought decent guys, but he hasn't really beaten any of them. I don't think he's really that physical. He's so easy to hit on the feet, and I don't think particularly durable. I just don't really rate Shipman at all. Bessette, I don't really rate either, and that's the thing. And you can make an argument you should bet Shipman if that's the case. But it does seem like Bessette hits hard, and something I noticed, he's kind of shifted into being a grappler, Bessette has, over his last couple fights. And what I've noticed is he's very, very strong. He's not a great wrestler. He's a terrible jiu-jitsu player, to be honest. But he is a hoss, and that kind of a guy against Shipman, I think, could play pretty well. I think if Bissett ties him up in the clinch, he might be able. Yeah, Big Bird just said it in the chat. My boy Pierce, Shipman is shit, man. He's not good. I really wanted to bet him, and especially after taping Bissett. But I think Bissett's just. He's younger, way too much horsepower, I think. I don't even rate Bissett striking, but you look at Shipman and he's trying to play this Wonder Boy game, this outside the karate stance, but he doesn't have a jab. He has no range management, and if you close distance on him, he's about as easy as it gets to hit. I was talking to my boy Andrew Gombas yesterday about this, and I had texted him last week when he asked me what I thought of the Budka fight, and I was just like, never Budka, or a couple weeks ago. And I asked him, what do you think about Shipman? And he's like, never Shipman. And I think that's the take here. I don't really want to bet Bissett at -150, but I think Bissett's a much better athlete. He's younger, far more likely to win by KO. I think Shipman's best case here is maybe he can stop takedowns, get to the front headlock position, and kind of dominate from there. But it would surprise me. I think Bissett should handle him. -150 on a guy who's going from fighting kind of shitty ass fighters on UAE Warriors to here is not interest me much. Next fight, we got Archie Colgan. He's taking on Manuel Sosa. This is a banger. Colgan's a guy who I've been trying to fade over, his last couple fights, and he's outperformed my expectations. With that said, I don't really love the juice here. -200, come back on Sosa, +170. I bet Tim Wild as a dog against Sosa last fight, and I felt like that was the kind of spot I wanted to fade Sosa with, even though he knocked out Wild. It was Tim Wild, rangy, high volume striker who could, make him miss a lot and kind of make him use a lot of energy to close distance. And that's more or less what happened until Sosa caught him. But that's not really Colgan's game. Colgan is either going to wrestle him, or exchange heavy with him. Now, I do think Colgan can wrestle him here. I think he's -200 for a reason. He is the much better wrestler here. And I was kind of looking to play Sosa initially, but my issue is I do think Colgan can wrestle him. Now, Sosa may work up, but most of his other fights where guys were a real wrestling threat. It's funny because Brick Squad just said Colgan is fighting a guy with finally has comparable hardware. And that's true, but conversely, so is Sosa. So, that's the other thing. Sosa, he has no semblance of defense, in any range, in any part of the game. He does hit like a truck, and he is very explosive. But now he's actually fighting a guy who is pretty explosive himself and also hits very hard, on top of which a guy who can wrestle pretty efficiently. And so, I lean Colgan here. I have no interest in a bet on Colgan at -200. And I think you could make a case that the line maybe is wide based on the fact that Sousa's obviously shown he's a very potent finisher and has some finishing upside. But I guess when I think about it in my head, I think I would make the finishing equity in this fight pretty close to even, honestly. Colgan is pretty heavy-handed himself. I granted he hasn't finished as high a percentage of his fights as Sousa has, but also the level of competition that Colgan has fought is a bit better. Brick Squad just said that in the chat too. It's a bit better than what Sousa has fought. So it's not really that surprising. And so it's if you think it's break even in terms of finishing ability, well, I think Sousa or Colgan won a decision against Emmanuel Sanchez. I mean, Emmanuel Sanchez is one of the most high output fighters in Bellator, and he's got probably all of the wrestling upside and top time upside here. So I think the price is fine. I think Colgan, I would lean Colgan. I do think he could get knocked out in this fight, though. Sousa is very, very explosive and hits very, very hard. And I think Colgan, just in some respects, trusts himself a bit too much. And he's not a guy who's going to play the Tim Wild type game and try to make him miss on the outside. He's a guy who is pretty happy to bite the mouthpiece and exchange with you in the pocket. So if he does that with Sousa, things could go bad. But I just think he has more tools and more ways to win the fight. Moving on, we got Mark Casey, Tim Wild. I took some small Wild at +200 here. I think he's probably good for a bet until 155. It looks like there's 165s, 164, 162s out there. I'm not sure what 365s hanging on it. But I mean, look, I've been a fan of Mark Casey for a lot of his career. Good process, especially on the back end of his career here. He's obviously got or he used to have a lot of athleticism, but he's obviously a decent wrestler. He's got great cardio. He has been historically a fairly durable fighter, JKC, that is. And like those are great tools. A guy who can attempt 8, 10, 15 takedowns and not really slow down. Like that's really what you're looking for. The thing is, his striking, it's funny because JKC for much of his career was known as an athlete. He'd throw all this fancy spinning stuff, a lot of speed, but he never really seemed to actually be able to put together the striking game outside of calf kicks. Like he would just, you'd see him 2 to 3 times a fight do something crazy, and you'd be like, oh my God, like Mark JKC, such an athlete. If he ever figures it out, that's going to be it. But he never really figured it out. Instead, he kind of pivoted to wrestling, which one could argue is a better base for MMA than, or I wouldn't even say I could argue, than being a good striker. But something that concerns me with JKC is I think he's slowed down, or he's starting. It's weird because he's only 31. I feel like JKC has looked kind of washed his last couple fights. Now, granted, I don't really begrudge him losing to Joel Alvarez. Joel Alvarez kind of a demon, even if you get on top of him. But like the Cali Fernandez fight and the Michael Johnson fight, both were like very, very ugly looks to me. Not that he didn't take Michael Johnson down like that. I bet JKC there at minus 225, which in retrospect was a terrible bet, especially because Michael Johnson, like, look, if you get on top of him, he's fucked. But the guy has very, very good hips. But on the feet there, he just looked very, very slow. Like the only really efficacious strike he was throwing was kind of that teep/roundhouse to the body. Like he had some success with that, but other than that, he had very little success with his hands all fight. I don't want to say he gassed out, but he basically he out-volumed Johnson early, but kind of let Johnson take over on volume on the back end of the fight. And he seemed to just get discouraged and just stop throwing strikes in the back end. Then you flash forward to the Cali Fernandez fight. I bet him big against Cali Fernandez. And like going into that fight, my thought was JKC is a much better wrestler with much better cardio. He can take him down and hold him down easily. And if not, he's a better striker than Cali Fernandez. I don't really rate Fernandez that much. And instead, he looked like glacially slow. He did win the fight via his wrestling because Fernandez can't really get off his back and has bad cardio. But that's a fight. Hold on, I'm going to pull up the stats real quick because it's bizarre, like what the stats look like for this fight. But that fight, JKC got to top position against Fernandez, and he won it that way. But it was a split decision in a fight where Cali Fernandez landed for the fight 15 minutes. Cali Fernandez landed 23 significant strikes. JKC got 9 minutes of control and gave up only 23 significant strikes, and it went to a 15-minute decision. In part because he couldn't stop calf kicks from Fernandez. His hands looked slow, and he couldn't touch him at all with them. JKC's volume fell off a cliff. And even with his wrestling, JKC did what JKC does. He doesn't attempt subs. He doesn't look to take the back. He doesn't really throw ground and pound. He kind of just tries to be on top of you like a towel. And so, that was concerning because like it seemed like a fight that he just looked totally out of it. Like he looked like he was on his way out. And so now here he is in Bellator and he's fighting Tim Wilde, my boy Tim Wilde. I love Tim Wilde. He's pretty old, but Tim Wilde, you know what you're going to get. I shouldn't even say meat and potatoes. Long, rangy, very high output, good calf kicks, good body kicks, good jab, very, very hard to track down, just constantly moving. The whole question in this fight, I think, and whether the line is accurate is likely, how does the grappling go here? And I think JKC can probably get takedowns, but I don't know. I don't think they'll be easy for one. Like you saw Saul Rogers, he did almost sub Wilde early in that fight, but he got deep on a couple takedowns and couldn't get him down. I think Sal's like a commensurate wrestler to JKC and a much better control grappler. But two, even in that fight, Rogers got on top of him, and Rogers is a serious black belt and couldn't hold him down there. Mike Hamill got on top of him, kind of struggled to hold him down. I think JKC will struggle quite a bit to hold Wilde down when he does get on top of him. I also feel like when I'm looking at the fight, based on the guys JKC has wrestled well. In particular, he's got those two huge performances against Hadzovic and Borshev. But those are arguably the two guys with the worst takedown defense in the history of, men's lightweight MMA, like Borshev and Hadzovic. And so I don't think he's going to perform anywhere near that level here. Could he get 5 or 6 takedowns? It's possible. That could happen. I'd be a little surprised. I tend to think he's going to get between 2 and 4 takedowns in this fight if that's his game plan. But also with those guys, they don't really tend to move that much, like, try to pick you off and move on the outside. They're both kind of happy to just bite down and, meet you, which makes it pretty easy for JKC to get inside. But yeah, I mean, the question is, once he gets on top, can he hold him there? And like, I really don't think so. So it's like, I kind of view it as the most likely scenario if it goes 15 minutes in terms of grappling is JKC gets between, let's say 3 and 5 takedowns and maybe between 3 and 5 minutes of control. On the feet's interesting because JKC 3 years ago, I would say, is a lot faster than Wild, but he hasn't really looked it lately. He's much lower volume than Wild. So, but I do think JKC, he could hurt Wild on the feet. Wild obviously coming off a knockout. JKC does throw big, though I don't think he's got great power. But I mean, I think Wild will land many more strikes than JKC does on the feet. Something else that I thought is interesting, it's like people forget this, but if you go back in the day, JKC got absolutely crippled by Drakkar Klose from leg kicks, and that was kind of happening against Fernandez last fight too. Like, JKC throws his own, but he does not take calf kicks particularly well. So, like, I just kind of think I favor Wild slightly on the feet. I know JKC can get takedowns, but I don't think he can wipe Wild out there, and he doesn't throw ground and pound or attempt subs. So with that dynamic, it's like, how do I get past minus 150 for JKC? It's hard for me. Like, I put him at minus 150. I like Wild very small here. Moving on, Luke Trainer, Laurinus Urbanavicius. I don't have a lot to say here. Urbanavicius being brought in to do a job. The guy's literally been fighting like fake fighters for his whole career. Luke Trainer, I don't want to call him one of the better prospects in Bellator, but he is dangerous. He's long, decent power, decent takedown game, good submission game. I mean, Urbanavicius, looks like he's got some pop himself, but I just don't think he's got much for Trainer. I think the big favorite price on Trainer is more than correct. I mean, I'm not interested in parlaying like a minus 1,100 or anything, but Trainer should do fine. Feels similarly by the next fight. Simeon Powell, Rafael Xavier. It feels like a fight that's being made for Simeon Powell. I'm pretty high on Simeon Powell. He kind of reminds me of a younger, more raw Jalen Turner. I mean, obviously he fights at a much heavier weight class. And no, I'm not saying that just because they are both black and look very similarly. But Powell's very, very tall for the weight class, very long for the weight class, throws a lot of good output. He's a decent counter grappler, has a kind of sneaky sub game to him, a lot of pop. And it seems like Xavier is being brought in to do a job and take an L here. Xavier, he's got a bit more efficacy to his game than Urbanavicius does. He does seem to hit pretty hard. And, Powell is coming off being knocked out by Jacob Nito, but that fight was a long, long time ago. It was like a year ago, but it shouldn't have an impact on this fight. But like, honestly, if Powell engages heavy in the pocket with him, Xavier could knock him out here. Like, that wouldn't be shocking. I mean, it would be a little surprising, but I mean, it could happen. But I mean, in the aggregate, Powell's game is just so much more refined. He fights long. I think Xavier is going to have a hard time closing the distance. I just think Powell's output and power are going to be just huge difference makers here. And I think if he decides he wants to take him down, which he doesn't often, it would probably be the smartest path here and the safest. He'll dominate, but honestly, he should win this fight everywhere. I don't think this is wide. Dale's saying this is wide. I really don't think so. Like, I honestly think Powell is like one of the more talented fighters in the division, to be honest. He's pretty nasty. It's kind of annoying because like he got knocked out by Neto, but like I think PFL this season at 205 would have been a lot more interesting with Powell in there than Neto. Like, I think Powell had a lot more. I mean, Neto almost beat Impa, but I think Powell had a lot more scope for competing with Impa over 15 minutes than Neto did. And for most of the guys at 205, I actually think Powell is he the son of Jerome Powell? I would not be a fan of him if he was the son of Jerome Powell. But I think Neto, he had a lot more scope for competing in the light heavyweight division. So it's kind of a bummer. Hopefully he gets there. They put him in PFL next year because I like his game a lot. But yeah, he's going to dominate here, I think. Anyway, moving on. Main event, Sarah Collins. Not a fan of Sarah Collins. Minus 130, taking on Leah McCourt, plus 100. Will I bet Leah McCourt? I'm not sure yet. I'm kind of monitoring the line. I'm kind of leaning that way. I bet Sinead Kavanaugh large against Sarah Collins, and that was quite a disappointing fight. Probably shouldn't have bet a 39-year-old woman off a major knee injury. But like, Sarah Collins had like 4 fights. She was a judoka. I didn't think she had much chance to take Kavanaugh down. And instead, I'm thinking like, oh yeah, Kavanaugh's going to go forward and just bomb on this chick and put her out. Instead, Kavanaugh just kind of accepted getting kicked on the back foot for 15 minutes. It was pretty frustrating. Things with Collins comes from very high level judo background, very good throws, decent scarf hold. I don't think her grappling in the aggregate is that good if she's like on top of you, like chest to chest or in like half guard or whatnot. But she does have a judo game. She can get fights down. Her striking actually impressed me a bit against Kavanaugh. Like, I don't think she's like a great striker or anything like it. But I was talking with Sean Orr about this earlier today, but she does seem to have good timing. Like, she's not high output, but she throws her shots straight, which doesn't happen often in women's MMA. And she does seem to do a good job of countering entries with like check hooks, decent jab, and like a decent left body kick, especially against orthodox fighters. So she's a bit better striking than I gave her credit for. I mean, she's okay. Sarah Collins, okay. Like, pretty low work rate. Good judo. Leah McCourt, not very good. I like Leah McCourt. She's a fun fighter, but she's not a very good one. Also a judoka. Her striking, also not very good. She comes forward and just McCourt tends to come forward, throwing a ton of output, get hit a bunch of times, and then try to tie you up in the clinch and take you down. And yeah, I mean, like McCourt's not winning many fights at distance, if any, ever. It's just not her game. She's very, very bad at striking. If she can maintain her distance, but she can't do that. So yeah, I mean, that's not her game. Her game is to come in, take you down, try to ground and pound you out, or get a sub. Looking at this fight, I mean, Collins is almost certainly better at judo than McCourt is. She comes from a much higher pedigree than McCourt does, but they're both judo black belts. But I think Collins probably would land more takedowns or whatnot than McCourt will. I do not expect it to play out like the Kavanaugh fight. I really would be shocked if McCourt is going to sit back at distance and just like have a tepid striking fight with Collins. Just not her game at all. I think she's going to bomb forward, get into the clinch, and what happens from there will happen. The thing is, and the reason I lean McCourt is I do think McCourt's got a much better top game than Collins and much better jiu-jitsu. So like one of the things we've seen with Collins in a couple fights, her debut with Sorensen in Bellator and in a couple of her regional fights, is she likes to do that head and arm throw into a scarf hold and not give it up. The thing is, that's not that hard to combat if you know what you're doing. It's just that most of the women she's fought haven't. McCourt's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. She's very, very long too, which also helps. And so like, I think if Collins tries to do that to her, and I saw this happen where once regionally, but there's a pretty high probability she's going to get her back taken by McCourt here. Additionally, I think Collins will, if she doesn't do that and gets her down and is sitting there, chest to chest with McCourt, I think she's going to have a very hard time controlling McCourt. And I think it would likely lead to a lot of scrambles. And I kind of trust McCourt's jiu-jitsu a bit more in scrambles than I trust Collins. Like I said, she's longer, she's more athletic, she's a little younger. And she's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Like, I think she's more reliable to win scrambles and get the dominant positions. So it's like, if you told me they're striking on the outside for 15 minutes, I would agree this line makes sense. Collins is pretty clearly to me a better striker than McCourt is. She's also clearly the better judoka. But I also trust, like, even in the clinch, I think McCourt's work rate in the clinch in terms of clinch striking will be a lot higher than Collins. And I think of the two, McCourt's got much more finishing upside in this fight than Collins. I shouldn't say much more. She's got a bit more finishing upside than Collins does, though. Like, I'd be pretty surprised if McCourt gets submitted, whereas I wouldn't be all that shocked if Collins did. And like, just even zooming out macro, it's like Leah McCourt, you could make an argument, got robbed against like Zingano 2 fights ago. She was out scrambling her at points. Collins is nowhere near the grappler Zingano is. Better judoka, but she is nowhere near where Zingano is or was ever as a grappler. McCourt's kind of tricky. She's an athlete. She's got very good cardio. She keeps a high pace, and she's long. And I think that could cause Collins problems here. Am I betting her? I haven't decided, just because, Dale mentioned it in the chat. A couple people have. McCourt, not very good at MMA. But I think she should be a slight favorite here. She's got about twice the experience. She's fought a much higher level of competition than Collins has in the aggregate. She's beaten better fighters than Collins has. Yeah, I lean the McCourt side here. I kind of want to bet her. I might. I'm going to see if it keeps blowing out, though. I think it could get to like plus 115, plus 120 tomorrow. But yeah, Nick Rodriguez asked, do I think Powell finishes? Probably, yeah. I mean, Powell hits really hard, and keeps it at a high pace, like if he's dominating the way I think he will, I think he finishes. I don't think there's much. I think these props are overjuiced though, to be completely honest. But yeah, guys, that's going to do it. Sorry if I was kind of rambling and all over the place. I'm pretty still kind of sick. So yeah, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, follow or fade. I wish everybody luck tomorrow. Please drop a like, subscribe. I'd appreciate it. And I'll see you guys Monday for Contender Series. Peace.